Hey everyone! My daughter wanted chicken nuggets for dinner on her 3rd birthday. I have been buying the organic ones from Costco, but last time I was there they didn't have any. Now I typically buy the organic chicken nuggets, not just because the meat's organic, but also the ingredients used on the breading. It's typically higher quality on the organic ones. So I checked Kroger for organic chicken nuggets, and their organic chicken nuggets were $11 a pound. Now I decided I wasn't gonna pay $11 a pound for chicken nuggets, so I decided to make my own. Now I'm not gonna lie to you, making chicken nuggets is not this quick and easy thing, which is why I typically buy them. But I decided to go ahead and make them anyways. I wanted to make these chicken nuggets ahead of time and freeze them. I was also making the cake for her birthday, which I did the day before, but I wanted to relax and just chill out on her birthday and not be cooking all day long. As far as the recipe, I found an America's Test Kitchen one that looked pretty promising, but I changed it a little bit. I used whole wheat flour instead of the white flour that it called for, and I also used some whole wheat breadcrumbs, and I made my own breadcrumbs. I also decided I wanted to bake the chicken nuggets instead of pan fry them like they do in the America's Test Kitchen recipe. I followed the instructions for baking the chicken nuggets from a Martha Stewart recipe. You can find links to both of the original recipes I used in the description box below. I was doing a little over 3.5 pounds of chicken, and I could just picture pan frying all of that chicken. It would take forever and it would be messy, opposed to just putting it in a pan and sticking it in the oven is more hands off, and I was able to multitask and do other things while they were in the oven. And even though the process of making these took a while, I do have chicken nuggets in the freezer for some easy pop in the oven meals. The first thing I did was make the breadcrumbs for the nuggets. I make all my bread for my family, so breadcrumbs just fall in line with that. Before you start, have your oven preheated to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Here I have a loaf of white bread that needs to be used up. I chopped it on low speed in the blender using the tamper on my Vitamix to make sure all the bread comes in contact with the blade. I'm not seasoning these since I'm using them with some seasoning on the chicken nuggets, but I'll explain later that I think I should have. Next, spread out the breadcrumbs in a thin layer on a baking sheet and put them in a preheated oven for 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, take them out, give them a toss and a flip, and put them back in the oven for another 5 minutes. After a total of 10 minutes, they still weren't dry enough. So I put them in for another 5, and after a total of 15 minutes, they were done. Hear that sound? Now, I didn't have enough breadcrumbs from the white bread, so I also made breadcrumbs from whole wheat bread. I repeated the process again, but this time with freshly made whole wheat bread. The recipe for my favorite whole wheat bread can be found on the screen and in the description box below. I provide 2 ways to make it, by hand kneading it or by using a bread machine. This time I took the breadcrumbs out only once to flip and toss, because the second time they were in the oven, I got distracted by the kids, didn't hear my timer go off, but luckily they were perfect when I took them out. I think I had them in there for an additional 10 to 15 minutes after the initial 5. Different bread may take a different amount of time. I think it is safe just to check every 5 minutes for doneness. Now it's time to really start making those chicken nuggets. I am making about 2.5 times more than the original recipe. First, I prepare the brine by adding the 2.5 tablespoons of sea salt and 5 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce and 5 cups of water. The Worcestershire sauce I'm using is one I got from Costco for Good Buy, and if I remember correctly, I like the ingredients in this brand over others. Next, I butterfly over 3.5 pounds of chicken breast by cutting it in half and then cutting 1-inch strips by using my finger between each of my knuckles to measure, because that is about 1 inch. Now just finish cutting them into the size you prefer, trying to keep them about the same size, but it won't be perfect. Now it is time to add the brine to the chicken breast and let it sit for a half hour. While the chicken breast is marinating for a half hour, I'm going to get everything else prepared for coating the chicken. I first preheat my oven to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. I line my baking sheet with foil and place a wire rack on top. Honestly, I found the foil to be unnecessary because I didn't end up with anything sticking after the nuggets were cooked. I pump up my oil sprayer and give the wire rack a good coat to ensure the nuggets don't stick. Just in case you're wondering, I used avocado oil in my oil sprayer, but you can use whatever you want. To prepare the flour coating, I used whole wheat flour instead of the white flour it calls for in the recipe. Even though I am making roughly 2.5 times the recipe, I decided to only double the flour, as I feel like I typically have flour left over with these types of recipes. Here I add 1 cup of whole wheat flour, 2 tablespoons of dried chopped onions, I didn't have the onion powder that the recipe called for, and 2 tablespoons of granulated garlic. Well, I had a lot more garlic, but that's okay. We like garlic in this house. I mix it all together and add the salt and pepper just by eyeballing the amount. Then I give it a taste to make sure it's good before I move on. On to the eggs. In total, I'll need 6 large eggs. Again, like the flour, I'm doubling instead of doing 2.5 times more the amount. I'm going to start with just 3, just in case I end up with flour and breadcrumbs in my eggs. This way, I can start with a fresh set of eggs in the middle of coating. Here, I just give them a good whisk until they are combined. Same as the eggs, I'm only starting with half of the breadcrumbs. This way, if I end up with wet breadcrumbs after a lot of dipping, I can start with a fresh batch in the middle of the dipping process. First, I add the white breadcrumbs and then the whole wheat and mix them together. I decided to add half of the flour to a plate to avoid having to throw away any leftover flour. After a half hour, I drain the chicken and let it sit in the strainer for a few minutes to make sure all of it drained. While it sat in the strainer, I lined a baking sheet with paper towel and put extra paper towel nearby. I typically like to avoid using one-time use items in the kitchen, but with raw meat, I see this as a must. And here you can see me patting the chicken dry, trying to get every single one. Since I placed a few layers of paper towel on the baking sheet, I was able to pull away a layer when it got too wet. If you don't make as much as I do, you probably won't need as much paper towel. I'm ready to move on, but I even blot the chicken as I go to make sure it's really dry. Now it is time to dip it in the flour and coat it completely with flour. Here you can see how it is covered. Then it goes in the eggs, and lastly the breadcrumbs, making sure to really press on the breadcrumbs. During this process, I made sure to use my right hand only for the eggs and the breadcrumbs, so I could keep my left hand dry for the flour. Once coated, place them on your baking sheet, and there is my sheet filled up. Since I'm not frying them, I decided it would be a good idea to spray them with oil before putting them in the oven for 12 minutes. But taking them out after 6 minutes to flip them. Now I work on my second tray while the first tray is in the oven. As a rack, I'm using this fish grate that is for the grill, but it works fine as a wire rack. Doing as much chicken as I did, I ended up with 4 trays of chicken nuggets. This is my first tray of chicken nuggets after 6 minutes in the oven. Time to flip them, and as you can see, they are very easy to flip, and I had no sticking. Next, I spray them with oil, and they go back in the oven for another 6 minutes. Ta-da! Here they are after the second round of 6 minutes. At first glance, I was wondering if they could be just a bit more golden brown, but then I remembered I would be freezing them and putting them back in the oven before serving, so I figured it was best just to leave them the way that they are. I sacrificed the largest one and broke it open to check for doneness. You could use a meat thermometer instead. You could cool them completely in the pan that you cooked them on, but I needed my pans for additional batches, so I cooled them completely on a cooling rack. Once cooled, I placed them on a cookie sheet and put them in the freezer. Once frozen on the cookie sheet, I transferred all of them to gallon-size Ziploc bags. I needed 2 1-gallon Ziploc bags for the amount of chicken nuggets I made. Once these chicken nuggets are frozen and you want to cook them, set your oven to 350 degrees and cook them for 30 minutes and they're done. So how did they turn out? They were really good. My daughter really loved them, and my son and my husband really enjoyed them too. However, I did notice that the breading could use a little bit more flavor. Even though I accidentally poured in all that garlic powder, it still tasted a little bland to me. And I tasted the flour while I was making it, and it tasted fine, but once it was mixed with the chicken and the panko, it didn't have as much flavor as I would like. Next time, I'm going to try adding some salt and Parmesan cheese to the panko like Martha Stewart does in her recipe. And I'd also like to see if there's a faster way to coat all that chicken, because if there was, it'd make the whole process of making chicken nuggets easier. I'm thinking maybe put all of the chicken in a bowl with the flour, toss it up, and then put it on a pan, baking sheet, and pour the eggs over it, and have a baking sheet of panko already ready, and quickly take the chicken from the egg mixture, which you probably don't want it to sit in too long, over to the panko. I don't know if it would work, but just a thought. Well, bye, and thank you for watching.